All right, so today I thought we could talk about what most SMB owners or SMB leaders should know about zero-day attacks. We hear a lot about zero-day attacks or zero-day vulnerabilities in the news, but the truth is most SMB leaders and owners are too busy, managing their business, growing their business, managing their staff, so on and so forth, to stay up to date on what they can actually do to protect their business from a zero-day attack. So today I wanted to talk to Greg Skasny. He's our Chief Technology Officer here at Blueshift. And again, just want to touch on what exactly can small business leaders do to protect themselves from zero-day attacks, and share maybe some tips as far as maybe best practices that you might want to incorporate into your own SMB to help protect your business from these glaring vulnerabilities. So Greg, just wanted to thank you for your time today and looking forward to chatting with you.
Happy to be here. Always happy to, help educate people around what's happening in the cyber world and how they can better protect themselves. It's the only way we win.
Awesome. Great. So just I think it was the last week or maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, Google actually put out a report where they have been tracking the number of zero-day vulnerabilities that are in the wild, as they call it. And they've been doing this since 2014. And 2021 was actually the year that had the most recorded zero-day vulnerabilities that were discovered in the wild from any time from 2014 until 2021. In fact, the number actually doubled from 2020 to 2021. I believe the number is about 53 of these zero-day vulnerabilities were discovered. So this is obviously something that seems like it's increasing, it's not decreasing. It's a little bit interesting to me with all the advanced, cyber security techniques out there and all the cybersecurity companies out there. You would think maybe some of these numbers would be going down, but it's kind of the inverse. So Greg, I know just terminology is very important here. So before we get into maybe learning more about exactly like how businesses can protect themselves from zero-day attacks, in my research, I found there's zero-day attacks, there are zero-day vulnerabilities, and there are zero-day, I think it's like discoveries. So can you just kind of help clarify what are the differences between each one of these? Because I think it's going to be important for us to define these terms so we can then talk about them, as educatedly as possible.
Yeah, I think it's important people understand what the term zero day means. So zero day means there's a vulnerability that's not known, right? So 0 days means it's no one knows about it. It's there. And so you have a couple different things, right? You have this, what they call a 0 day vulnerability, which means that there's a piece of software, could be any piece of software that has a vulnerability that could be exploited by an adversary. Now, that doesn't mean anybody knows about that yet. And there's 0 days out there everywhere. Humans write software, humans make mistakes, things happen. That's what leads to these 0 day vulnerabilities. So there's a ton of these vulnerabilities out there, and there are companies like Google. Google has a thing that's called Project Zeros, where that data came from. Mm-hmm. And they search through software looking for vulnerabilities. And there's different levels of these things too. Not every 0 day is catastrophic, but a lot of the ones they find are usually bad. So they're going out there looking for them, but the usual process is a security researcher will find a vulnerability. They will responsibly disclose that vulnerability to the software developer. They will then patch that vulnerability, release the patch, and then that vulnerability is announced to the public along with how to fix it. So that, those are not 0 days. The problem that comes about is there are vulnerabilities out there, and there are companies out there who purposely try to find 0 day vulnerabilities that are egregious. They'll sell them. They're very valuable. So like even the U.S. government and other governments will budget a lot of money to buy 0 days. They're out there. So they're very valuable because if you don't know they exist and you don't have a patch for them, it's very difficult to defend against them. If you look at things like SolarWinds was a kind of a no-day vulnerability. It's very hard to defend against things that you don't know about. So that's why they're valuable and they're out there. The reason you're seeing more now is probably because of SolarWinds. It's an opinion of mine, but probably because of the depth of the SolarWinds breaches, a lot more access to source code and things in organizations, and so you're seeing more of that. But obviously, there's a big push to try to find and fix those through things like Project Zero, right? So you have vulnerability out there, but not all 0 day vulnerabilities are in the. We heard you use the term "in the wild," right? Mm-hmm. So you can have a vulnerability that is out there, but no one is exploiting. Right? There's no adversary out there actively exploiting that vulnerability. It exists. Obviously it needs to be patched, but there's not a patch available yet. So those things are out there. Then there are 0 day attacks, right? So those are now exploits that are written by an adversary that will utilize a 0 day vulnerability to attack someone. And that could range from things of your vulnerabilities range in that's what I'm looking for in what they do, right? So the what happens with the vulnerability could be something as like a denial of service vulnerability, right? So I can exploit this vulnerability and will cause something to crash. Problematic, but not the end of the world. But it could also rank up there with things like what's called remote code execution, which means that now I can use that vulnerability to install code into a system to gain control of that. So those are bad, right? Other ones could be privilege escalation vulnerabilities. Those are, if I get access to a system, I can use this 0 day to elevate my privileges in that system to then be able to pivot or do other things or grab more credentials and things like that. So, the impact is what I was looking at, what I was looking for. The impact of those vulnerabilities are something that people need to take into account as well, right? So it's not just, hey, we have the 0 day vulnerability. If it's a 0 day vulnerability and it doesn't really, the impact is very, very low, not a big deal. If it's a 0 day vulnerability, impact is very, very high. Again, one of those remote code execution type vulnerabilities. And then that was like Log4j. If people had heard that, I'm sure that term has been out there. People understand that. But Log4j was one of those remote code execution vulnerabilities that was very, very bad, right? So it's a 0 day that was actively exploited, and a lot of people had that software. So that's what makes them dangerous, and that's what makes them so appealing to a cyber adversary. If you don't have good defenses or you can't monitor that kind of stuff, it's much easier for them to exploit that than try to social engineer somebody or do all the other things that they do to try to get in. I could just take advantage of this vulnerability, and now I'm in and I can do what I need to do to get whatever their action on objectives are. It's ransom or stealing data or whatever the case may be.
So that kind of brings to mind a couple questions. The first would be, you were mentioning, there's a lot of cyber adversaries or bad guys out there looking for these vulnerabilities. There's other organizations or even governments that are looking for these as well. And so to kind of, if I was to put myself in a bad guy's shoe or in a cyber adversary's shoes, if I'm spending a lot of my time, energy, resources, so on and so forth, looking for these vulnerabilities, I mean, my instinct would go towards finding a vulnerability in a platform or a software or a tool or a device or what have you that's very, very popular, right? Because I want to get the most bang for my buck in terms of the investment of my time, energy, and resources and so forth. So these vulnerabilities that have been discovered, at least the ones that Google is documenting, again, I think it was 53 that they found in 2021. Can you talk a little bit about like what platforms or tools or developers, if you will, or companies were these were most commonly found to have these vulnerabilities?
They're omnipresent is the best way I can say that, right? So they really span everything from end user software to server software to devices, routers and firewalls and things like that. It really does span the gamut of all IT systems that a company would use. And the thing that Google Project Zero does, they're not actively exploiting these things. Right? They're finding the vulnerabilities, right. They're responsibly disclosing them, trying to get the manufacturers. Sometimes manufacturers don't want to own up to the fact that they have this vulnerability, right? They'll, it's not a problem when it is a problem, but the responsible disclosure of that is what makes security work. But it's really it is omnipresent. There's vulnerabilities from everything, like from networking in battery backup equipment right now to the Linux kernel that runs on server operating systems to other things. I won't mention company names, but all the software you're going to use on your Mac or your Windows computer. There's always going to be some vulnerability out there. Now, obviously, the ones that have the largest impact are ones that are obviously have reliable exploits behind them, and two, that affect the most people. So like if you get a 0 day vulnerability in the Windows operating system, right? So that's a giant chunk of the end user market, very, very valuable. and there's also an evolution that happens with vulnerabilities, right? So there's not just 0 day vulnerabilities. You're going to start hearing about things called 0-click vulnerabilities. These are things that adversaries can use to exploit a device without you even doing anything, right? They can just send you a message and then your device is compromised. So those things are coming down the pipe. Those are used by very people who are very serious about their job. But all that high end exploitation does tend to kind of slowly drift downhill. And so, there's going to be there's always this never ending cat and mouse game of trying to figure out what they're able to exploit versus what we're able to defend against.
So speaking of that, and I want to talk about some actual examples here so we can kind of get our heads around like what exactly these look like in the wild. But before that, just piggybacking on your last comment there, yeah, are the good guys getting better at detecting these, or are the bad guys getting better at like finding them and exploiting them? Because again, the numbers seem to be on the rise, which to me it seemed like maybe a little counterintuitive. So again, are we getting better at catching these and recognizing them before something catastrophic happens, or are the bad guys getting better at detecting them and then exploiting them?
Yes. The yes is going to be the
To
best word.
both.
It's one of those things that if you don't look, you won't find. Right. So like,
Mm-hmm.
if we just went through a pandemic, if you don't test, you don't have a pandemic, or just that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. If you're not looking for something, you're not going to find it. Now, something as egregious as these type of vulnerabilities, they're always out there looking. But again, the amount, the volume of systems and software and things that are out there is almost infinite. So you're not going to ever find all of these. Now, again, the more things that come out, the more research support, and the more you're going to find. Everything is going to have a vulnerability at some point. It's just the nature of the beast. So yeah, we are looking harder, so we're going to find more. And I don't really think that finding more is the problem. Like, so when the good guys, I'm gonna classify the Google Project Zero as the good guys, very, very bright individuals. When the good guys find it, that's a good thing. The more we're looking, the more we're finding, the better off we're going to be. The problem comes in when you start seeing O-days that are being detected because an adversary has an exploit to them already, right? Not the good guys that detected, the adversaries are utilizing this against somebody, and that's how we detect it. Those are also on the rise as well. So it's kind of both. We have good guys that are looking, but we also have bad guys who are exploiting, and that's how we're getting more of these things. It used to be, 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, O-day attacks were talked about, but they weren't utilized a ton because of how expensive they were. So it's not like the guys who are doing ransomware events and things like that, not that they're pretty sophisticated now, but back then they weren't as sophisticated. They weren't going to burn that type of exploit on a small business, right? They're going to sell it to a government or someone who's going to get money out of that. It's not the case anymore. Now it's everybody's trying to use those things any chance they get. So again, that kind of downhill shift of the exploitation technology that happens, right? So again, just like everything in technology gets better and better and better, well, the bad guys get better and better and better too. And so that's what we're kind of seeing, the fallout from why we're seeing more exploitation of zero-day exploits in the wild now.
So I wanted to talk about, some of those exploits, if you will. As we mentioned numerous times so far, 2021 saw, I think it was 53 of these vulnerabilities that at least Google discovered. And I know there were at least a handful, maybe even more of, rather devastating attacks. So what were like one or two of the most devastating, or impactful or harmful zero-day attacks that actually happened maybe in the last year or so? And do me a favor, just like explain it to me like I'm five a little bit.
Yeah.
Like what kind of impacts did these actually have on the day-to-day operations of businesses?
The biggest one, and again, and it's hard to classify this as either a 0-day or a. I wouldn't. It's hard to classify. SolarWinds is going to be the biggest deal, right? But again, it's hard to classify that as a true O-day. It was, but it wasn't. Someone snuck software in, so I don't know if they would really classify that as an O-day. But that was one of the biggest issues that happened during 2021, right? So SolarWinds software is used to run the back ends of IT infrastructure, right? So it's on servers, it's on your Active Directory server, it's in your networking equipment. It has elevated privileges. It has access to all the things, all the goody juiciness that a hacker would want, right? So the supply chain exploitation of that can lead. You can think of the cascading things that happen because of that. And this is my opinion. I have no facts to back what I'm going to say up, unfortunately, but because the facts around this are scarce. But realize that those guys had that access for a long time. Those guys, I'm going to say the adversaries, and again, be that who that may, but having access into those systems could give them access to things like source code. The best way to develop a zero-day exploit is to have access to source code, right? If I can look at the source, I can use very smart programmers to figure out how to bypass things or where bugs may be and things like that. And then soon after that was that the SolarWinds exploit was discovered, other zero days started to pop out. First one being what's called proxy logon. And I'll explain what that is too. So a lot of companies still have what's called on-premise. So they have a server that sits in their office somewhere that hosts Microsoft Exchange. Microsoft Exchange is an email collaboration platform. It's been around since the late 90s. And in use by it now. It's in Office 365, but a lot of people still have on-premise Exchange servers. So proxy logon was a zero-day exploit that all an adversary had to do was send a special request to that server. That it's just a web server, and then with that request, they can then install software, what they call a web shell. Long story short, it's going to give the attacker these hands-on access to that Exchange server. Now, what does Exchange server have access to? Every contact in the organization, every email in the organization, everybody's information. Right? That's a huge deal. Again, zero-day vulnerability. It's a big impact, high impact vulnerability. That again, it's hard to detect. It was a single request that was able to do it. Now, there's other behaviors that you have to look at to be able to detect things like that after it's happened, but you're not going to stop that initial exploit from happening. You just didn't know it was there. Also, you had what's called a log4j. Everybody's heard for log4j, right? So, and I'll explain that in as easy as I can. So, there's software out there built on the Java framework, Java virtual machines. And that was vulnerable to basically sending a single type of request and then getting that kind of remote code execution on anything that was running this log4j software. And that's a lot of stuff. And then when you start seeing that it's so widespread that people didn't even know, like it's not like Exchange was easy, right? You were running Exchange. Yes. Is it on-premise? Yes. Okay. I know I need to patch. Log4j, not so much. You don't even know what software. There's so many other pieces of software who utilize those libraries that it's just impossible to know. So you have to monitor for that stuff. You have to look and find out what the way we deal with things like that. We look for indicators of compromise. We get these kind of what they call IOCs. We search for those things. We monitor for those things. And when we see those things, then we can hunt to try to figure out, okay, is this a valid exploit into log4j or not? Again, but very far reaching, very high impact vulnerabilities for that. There's other ones out there. There was one against, and again, I'm not bashing the company at all, but everybody has vulnerabilities. It's it happens. But there was a firewall vendor that had a vulnerability where in their VPN servers, all I had to do was send a specific request, again, one request to this firewall VPN device, and it would then reply to me with who was logged in, their username, their password in plain text, and the access level that they had. That's bad, right? That's a bad vulnerability. Again, but if you don't know that's out there and you're not monitoring for odd requests like that, you don't know what's happening. And then all of a sudden now, as an adversary, I have VPN access into a company that's akin to basically getting some kind of nefarious device and putting it on someone's network, which when I did red team stuff, that's game over. If I can physically get a device in the network, it's literally game over. It's bad. So you have access into that system now. So, things like that, those are the level of things that happen. Those are just three. And there was literally, again, not all of them have that level of impact, right? Some of them are, there's a no-day exploit for, there's tons of them for the Windows operating system, right? But there's no exploit for it, or they're not exploiting it. So, those things happen, but it's those ones that are exploited in the wild that you don't know about, and you don't know about until afterwards, that are so concerning, because now you're playing catch up. Right. Oh, we know about it. So it's no longer a 0 day. It's a single day or whatever. We have a patch for it, whatever the case may be. But now I have to go back and figure out what in my infrastructure is susceptible to that. Has it been exploited already? Do I have adversaries in there? What have they gotten into? The whole incident response process that you should be doing as a business. So they should be taken seriously. And it's not going, again, my opinion is it's really not going to it's going to get worse before it gets better. That's just the way technology is.
So once these, and I'm sure this answer varies based on, the vulnerability and whatnot, but, again, I'm sure this answer is going to vary, but, this firewall scenario you mentioned, the log4j, the SolarWinds, the Microsoft Exchange, how long, generally speaking, are these things like once someone starts exploiting them, is it like very obvious to to Microsoft or to this firewall company or so on and so forth, and they kind of send out a patch to everybody right away, and it's like a very limited window of how long an SMB or an organization might be affected by it? Or can these timelines on these things vary so long that they could be without the proper tools or team in place? Of course, an organization could be being exploited for some amount of time, even before like the parent company that can release the patch even realizes what's happening and then, dedicates time to fixing it.
They're never found out quickly. Some are, but for the most part, these vulnerabilities are there for they've been there for a long time. Like there
Right.
are O-Day vulnerabilities in software that has been out for literally 10 or 15 years. There's vulnerabilities in Linux, and I'm a Linux freak, but there are vulnerabilities in certain parts of Linux that were there since the beginning that no one knew about, right? So they may not be 0 days because no one's exploiting them, but they're vulnerabilities that need to be patched, which is why you have a vulnerability management program, right? So vulnerabilities are bad across the board, regardless if there's 0 days or not, right? So any vulnerability you have in systems in your organization, realize that attackers are lazy, right? So if you have a very vulnerable system that I can exploit very easily because you haven't patched it or whatever the case may be, and it may not be a 0 day, it may be something that is well known that is there, but you just haven't got around to patching it, they will absolutely use that against you. But some of these vulnerabilities, again, they could have been around for years and years and years, and unless you've detected them, I'll realize let's look at SolarWinds, right? So there's some timelines of how long. So how did SolarWinds get caught? They got caught not because they were in governments or NASA or places like that. They got caught because they were inside FireEye, which is a very sophisticated cybersecurity company, and someone registered 2 phones. That's how they figured it out, right? Like something odd's going on. So when they can sit in organizations like that, and again, they're waiting to make a mistake happens, and that's how they got caught, and that's what kind of brought down the whole house of cards. Most companies don't have a prayer in trying to figure out how long they've been in those systems, right? So, and that's part of what our job as security practitioners need to do, right? We need to be able to share that data, be able to get those IOCs, those indicators of compromise around those vulnerabilities out and published, and as widespread as possible, as fast as possible. That's the only way we can win, right? Everybody tries to, tries to, keep their hands around as much data. I found this and I'm going to try to monetize that. And again, there's nothing wrong with making money in cybersecurity and helping people, but we're not going to win the war by hoarding and trying to keep secret things that should be published. And that's one of the good things that Google Project Zero does. They publish, there's a very strict regiment to what they do. When they find a vulnerability, they'll contact the manufacturers. There's so many days they have to respond. If they don't respond, then they will disclose publicly that there's vulnerabilities out there. If they do respond, they work with them. So there's this documented process that goes through of how to go about responsibly disclosing these things and getting them fixed. And that's helpful. The only way we can stand a chance against the bad guys, the bad guys have no problem sharing. Like if they find, they're no issues, right? However we can make the most money, however we can defraud the most people, the better off it's going to be. Us on the defending side, we have to get to that mantra of being able to detect things quickly, get that information out there, make the job of our adversaries much, much more difficult. We're making it way too easy on them, and we need to stop. We need to stop that.
So I wanted to kind of one of the main questions I wanted to sort of try to answer in this whole interview is, how can SMBs protect themselves against a 0 day attack? And I know that's a little bit of a, from what I understand, in some ways it's impossible, right? Because you can't protect yourself against something, some vulnerability, because you don't know the vulnerability exists. Therefore, you can't know what defenses have in place. But one of the things we do here at Blueshift with our XDR platform and our security operations center is, we protect SMBs from all types of advanced cyber threats. So, is there anything an SMB can do to protect themselves from a 0 day attack, or at the very least, maybe be alerted to the fact that there is a vulnerability in their system, quickly, rather than 2, 3, 4, 5 months down the road, when everybody else finds out about it.
Yeah. And we won't be able to tell if there's all these active 0 days, not active, but there's, vulnerabilities we don't know about. We can't see either, but there are ways to watch. And that's the biggest thing. You have to kind of figure out, what's normal in your organization. And when you see things that are abnormal, looking for what we call anomalies, writing anomaly detection, looking for different patterns of communication around things that could possibly be being probed or kind of being exploited. When you see those different patterns, those are things you can at least be alerted to. Now, you may not know what's happening. Like, so the proxy logon is a great example. We had a few customers that have Exchange servers that were on premise, and we just saw a change in the behavior of how things were talking to those devices. Now we didn't know what, but we knew that something was happening. So we need to be on guard, right? So that means we need to say, okay, we need to heighten our monitoring around this. We need to be aware that this is happening and just watch, right? So when something comes down the pike, and it did, like a couple of days later, okay, bam, here's proxy logon, here's the patch. Now all we have to do is go to those customers and say, hey, listen, we're pretty sure you've been exploited. And you're not going to stop that. People seem to think they can prevent, and I use this in our sales presentations at times too, but and I don't use it as a salesy thing, but it's really, really true. People think they can prevent that exploitation, and you can't, because all these things, even 0 days is very apt to talk about that, but you're not going to prevent that initial compromise. What you have to be prepared to do is to detect and respond to that very, very quickly, because what happens then, if we're aware of that and we can respond to that, okay, bam, we know odd behavior, day, yep, you're exploited, here's the patch, fixed, right, within the span of 3 days, versus you're not looking, you don't know. Part of our business is to understand 0 days and vulnerability. So, but our customers are not in a cyber business, right? So they're doing what they're doing. They're doing their business. If they're not a customer and they're, just doing their business, here comes these things. They've been exploited. They don't know. I'm just using my email, and then they go down, and then a month or 2 months or 3 months down the road, what's happened? I got a ransom note on my screen. How did that happen? Well, you weren't paying attention, and that's the worst part of it. One of the things people need to remember is that every data breach, every ransomware event, every data deletion event, every cyber attack you've ever heard of in the news, on a podcast, websites, Twitter, whatever, every one of those bypassed the preventative technologies that were in place, or else you wouldn't have heard of it. If they would have prevented it, you would never hear that data breach, right? So then we hear of a lot of data breaches. We hear of a lot of cyber attacks. So you got to get out of that mindset that I can prevent this from happening. Yes, you need preventative technologies. Am I telling you to uninstall your antivirus? No. Install your antivirus. If you have an EDR, great, use your EDR. Have a firewall, have it configured correctly. Those things make it hard for the adversary. So let's make it hard for them, but also have that ability to be able to detect and respond very, very quickly to things, because that's what's going to take an incident that could be really, really bad and make it just a minor inconvenience. I have to patch, I have to get something, I may have to reload a server or something, but it's not, holy cow, my whole organization is ransomed, I don't know what to do. Or worse, you're part of some kind of critical infrastructure, and now the cyber warfare kicks off, and all your stuff's gone, and you're not just getting it back. So that's why I think it's so important, and why we have our platform, why we do what we're doing, and why I'm very passionate about it, because that capability is so needed to lessen not only make it difficult for the adversaries, but also lessen the effects of a successful intrusion.
Yeah, and you talked about our platform, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but for the companies that do have Blueshift XDR, what we're able to do is we can install what we call a cyber threat sensor into their network, if you will. We install what are called agents on numerous devices, or even virtual machines, printers, so on and so forth. You name it, we try to put an agent on it, and that allows us to monitor for things like you're talking about, like strange behavior. With these honeypots that we put out there, various indicators of compromise. So while an SMB might not be able to really technically defend themselves against any 0-day attack, with a service like Blueshift XDR and our team of cybersecurity experts, or good guy hackers, as I like to call them, we can monitor these networks and these devices, and we can be alerted, kind of like we were saying with this exchange vulnerability. We notice something strange going on. There was nothing in the news about this 0-day vulnerability, but by the data that we were receiving from these organizations, we could tell something strange is happening here. We need to keep an extra eye on it. And then, eventually, we were able to put kind of 2 and 2 together once kind of the news came out, and let these businesses know that, they may have been impacted by this, and, here are some recommended steps for remediation. Is that correct?
That's 100% correct. Yeah. I mean, the biggest thing for defensive cyber, right? So the blue side of cybersecurity, the defender side, is data collection, right? You need data. It's a big data problem, and even the smallest of companies generate a ton of data. So you need to be able to very quickly and efficiently go through that data, normalize that data, look for anomalies in that data, and then investigate the things that look odd. And that's really what we do. The collection of the data, not glorious, not proprietary, not everybody collects the same stuff, but the biggest there are barriers that companies have in implementing any cybersecurity platform, the complexity of getting those platforms. And if it's too complex, it's not going to get done. If you don't have the ability to monitor and understand what's coming out of that system, which is not easy, it's not going to get done. And this is part of the reason why most SMBs don't have the capabilities that we bring to the table, is because it sounds simple what we do, but it's not easy, right? So it can be simple, but it's just not an easy thing to do. And they don't understand, but they don't know. Most people think that the IT guy is the know-it-all, right? And I have a soft spot in my heart for IT practitioners, because they have a very tough job. Their boss expects them to know everything, from literally like, how can I get my kids switch to work with this thing, all the way up to like, how do I implement this huge cloud system, blah, 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 and how are we migrating here and expanding. And then in the spare time, you're supposed to defend the network. Oh yeah, also go ahead and make sure that no one's hacking into our systems. Good luck. It's just not a fair fight. It's a different, again, not that cybersecurity people shouldn't understand IT, because they should, it's obviously part of the deal. But the expertise needed from a cyber side is very, very different than running, corporate IT. I couldn't do that, right? But I know cyber really, really well. And so they have to understand these are different disciplines. Just like you would go to a specialist, if orthopedic surgeon, if you ripped your knee, you're not going to go to, an ENT guy for that kind of stuff. It's like that with IT as well. So we have to get those things. You have to get that understanding to the executives, and it's starting to come, right? The news is helping us, right? It sucks, but you see these cyber attacks happening. You hear about the stuff that at least brings the awareness that's needed at the board level and the executive level to say, well, what are we doing? And then you have things like CMMC on the government side, the cybersecurity model certifications that are happening, which are, again, audited type things that are kind of forcing the hand of people to get secure. So there's a lot of good things that are happening, but you have to make it so it's easy to install, easy to run, very low friction, but very, very effective. And I think that's kind of our secret sauce, by the way. That's what's going to make us successful.
So just one more question for you. I know, 0 days, I think they get a lot of headlines. They sound, for me, they sound terrifying, right? Like there's a 0 day attack and you're just like, the sky is falling, is kind of what goes through my mind when I read about one of these things. And, I think, a small business owner or leader would probably, think the same thing, oh no, someone's, get into, the critical infrastructure of my organization via some, devastating 0 day attack. But I want to just, and I'll get you out of here on this one. 0 day attacks, again, I think they sound very big, very scary. And of course they are, don't get me wrong. But wanted to kind of contrast that with just phishing. When I think about phishing, I think, here's some like silly looking email, clearly from somebody I don't know. He's asking me to click on a link. Like, I'm never going to click on that, and it almost seems like childish to me. Like, it's kind of like, I think maybe other people have that same perception, but how much should SMBs be worried about phishing compared to 0 days? Like, is one more common than the other? Is one, can a phishing attack be just as devastating as a 0 day attack, on at least on like an individual organization?
It's all important. Now, again, phishing is way, way more prevalent than O days, right? O days get a lot of press because they're impressive, and it's one of those things that it comes on and there's a lot of hubbub about it. But phishing attacks happen every day, and successful phishing attacks happen every day. And most of the ransomware events and data breaches you hear usually start with some sort of social engineering attack. And people think that, hey, I'm not going to ever click on those things until someone actually takes the time to target them. And listen, I've done thousands and thousands of phishing attempts in my lifetime doing what we've done. And people don't understand how, with a little bit of research, sending them an email that's very targeted to them, that they will think they're going to click. I've damn near almost clicked on my own phishing emails, not realizing that it was a test I sent to myself. It happens. And so you have to, people there was just an article I read. I don't remember the specifics, unfortunately, but someone, I think it was a university or it was a large company, did a phishing test, right? So they fished their users, which is a great thing to do. People should do that. They should definitely fish their users. But it was good. It was a really good. I mean, whoever did it did their research. You know, it was around the pandemic and some money and some stuff, and it was good. And it pissed people off. They were mad that, oh, this was a test and you tricked me. Well, damn right you should be mad. And shame on you for clicking on a damn thing. You know, I don't think end users should get pissed off with that kind of stuff, but they do. No one likes to be tricked, right? So you have to play this balance. But phishing is happening all over the place. But what I really wanted to say about the whole thing is what any business, I don't care what size, but especially SMBs, should not overlook basic cyber hygiene because of what in lieu of trying to like defend against an O-Day, right? So you're going to hear about O-Days in the news. Yeah, you should have a defense against it, but listen, you need to do the basic blocking and tackling. You need to do the basics really, really good. You need to harden your infrastructure. You need to do the easy thing. Do the easy things because they're easy and they're effective, and you should do those things all the time. Yeah, you should have some understanding of 0 days, but you should not, this is not where you should be putting your eggs. You need to be putting your eggs into the basics. I mean, there's tons of different frameworks out there. Get the NIST cybersecurity framework, do this, the CIS 20 controls, whatever. Do those things. They're not hard, but do them well and do them every day, and you will make yourself a harder target. And then once you have those things in and implemented and you do those well, now you can start thinking about, okay, where else am I vulnerable? What does 0 day impact me? If you're going to go try to throw all your eggs into 0 day and you're going to leave the low hanging fruit, hackers are lazy. When I was a red team guy, lazy. I'm going to take the easiest way possible. So that means if you're going to leave default credentials sitting on your network for your NAS equipment or something like that, I'm going to brutalize those every day of the week. If you're going to have crappy passwords for your domain admins, I'm going to grab those and I'm going to crack those. I'm going to use those against you. Stop doing those things, right? Do the basics well, and then let's worry about some of these other things too. So.
Awesome. Well, Greg, thank you for your time today. And for anybody who's watching this that wants more information about how Blueshift and our XDR platform and our managed security operations center can help protect you and your business, so we can keep our eyes on all of these things. Greg and his guys can monitor these for 0 days, for phishing, for threat detection, honeypot, so on and so forth. They can do all that stuff behind the scenes, so you guys can continue to focus on your business and doing what you do every day. You can visit blueshiftcyber.com, and we'd love to set up a time to talk with you and give you an overview of our platform.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob.